How's it going, YouTube? My name is ElvinNinja7, your resident Mistweaver Monk and favorite WoW healing content creator. And guys, this is not going to be your average Mythic Plus healer tier list video. As you can see on the screen, we're going to be taking a look at some of the other content creators, some of the more reputable content creators, healer Mythic Plus tier lists. And instead of offering my opinion, putting my own personalized tier list out there, we're going to kind of take the average of all their tier lists and make a tier list out of all of their tier lists. So making them do the work for us. Now, what's the purpose of this and what does this accomplish? Well, first off, I know that a lot of people don't enjoy watching tier list videos by content creators because there's a lot of bias in them. As you see here, one can put Holy Paladin in S tier, other one can put them down in feels bad tier. So there's a lot of bias and everyone has their own different experiences. And that's why I kind of want to stay out of making my own personal experience based tier list while also trying to make sense of all of these other guys' tier lists. So trying to eliminate their biases by putting them alongside other biased tier lists and trying to draw conclusions from all of them. So to put it simply, I don't just want to throw another opinionated tier list into the mix. I personally don't see a problem with that, but I know that some people do. But instead, what I plan to do is try to compile all of the tier lists that already exist and make one more meaningful tier list out of them. Now, obviously, this is not going to be perfect, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on each of the healer classes. Like I said, this will be different from some of the other tier list videos. And before we get started, I do want to kind of point out who we're going to be looking at. So first up is AutomaticJak, a very respected healing YouTuber, pushes high keys, and a very reputable healer. We also have Gingi with one of, I believe one of Echo's healers was on this video with him, helping him make this tier list. And I find this tier list very valuable because it shows some of the other specs, like non-healing specs alongside them. So we can really see what they consider to be S tier, and we can kind of dive into like something like augmentation, which we will be talking about in a second. And then also there's Dorki, another really high key pusher. So good, valuable insight for a Mythic Plus tier list. And as a tank player, kind of offers a different perspective, which when looking at a tier list alone, ideally you would look at someone like AutomaticJak, someone who does heal. However, when we're looking at all of these content creators side by side and taking kind of like an average, it's nice to have like a high Mythic Plus tank in the mix. And then we have Limit Maximum. Obviously, we all know who Limit Maximum is, but he also brought on Jdotb, another very reputable healing, streamer, YouTuber, high key pusher. And then last up is MadSkillzz. You guys know MadSkillzz. We kind of look alike. But you guys know MadSkillzz. He is very reputable in the healing scene. And if you don't know who these guys are, I will have links down in the description to all of their channels, all of these videos that we're referencing today. And then one last quick disclaimer, there were some patch notes that are going to be hitting once the patch actually drops. Like, we're in preseason right now, but once the main season 3 drops, there are a couple of nerfs and buffs to healers. So Discipline Priest has seen a slight damage decrease, a very slight damage decrease, and then a decrease to the Divine Aegis Shield. Druid is seeing some damage buffs in their cat form. So at the very top end where you will see some Druids cat weaving, you'll see a nice little damage boost there. And then lastly, the other nerf that we're going to talk about is the augmentation nerf. This is actually probably, of all these little healer changes, even though this isn't a healing spec, it is the one change that's going to have the most impact on these tier lists if they were up to date. Because you'll see throughout, like I said, there's a constant of these three in the bottom, but another constant in all of these videos is all of these creators talk about Preservation Evoker and how it is performing like at a very possible meta level. The only thing, like the main thing holding it back, is that it shares a class with augmentation, which if you look at these tier lists that also include DPS and tanks, you see augmentation is consistently in meta or the S plus tier. And when you're group building, you usually want like a very diverse group. But let's just go ahead and get into it. So first off, I do want to point out, like I said earlier, there are some biases and some content creators that feel more strongly about other classes than some of the other content creators do. However, one thing that kind of remains constant is these bottom two, Holy Priest and Resto Shaman. You'll see them kind of at the bottom of these tier lists throughout all the content creators. I mean, they are consistently the bottom two. Well, I guess not the bottom two, but toward the bottom, the two toward the bottom, and all of these content creators. And then also I do want to touch on Holy Paladin. There are still two people that really believe in Holy Paladin still after all these nerfs. AutomaticJak still has it in God mode tier, which is kind of like his version of like S or S plus, saying that it's going to be just very powerful because in his video he argues that it's still that Swiss Army knife that can deal with any amount of mechanics. It doesn't do good damage, which in my opinion would probably drop it down to the fits most groups tier, but he just argues that it's just S because it just can do still what it used to do, just at a lesser level. And then same with MadSkillzz, just saying this similar thing. But yeah, like I said, in most tier lists, you're gonna see it down a little lower, and then like you'll just see different things move around. Like Resto Druid moves around quite a bit. But then for the most part, Disc and Mistweaver kind of stay together, but Disc Priest does make it above Mistweaver on MadSkillzz tier list. So without further ado, I will show you the tier list of all of these kind of like congregated, and there you see it right here. There were two different metrics that I tried to work with. The first one, let me try to explain it because it got complicated to the point where I now have a headache looking at this. The most simple one was just writing down what tier each spec landed in and then just taking an average. And then the other one is trying to do a point system saying where they landed on each tier list. But there's a lot of like weight issues here, like being in the first of 3 tiers on one tier list holds a lot more weight than being the third out of 6 on another tier list. But I tried to do a point system, and you'll see here they did land on different point. And then I tried to take all the different possible permutations of scores, which there are 1,080 different possible permutations of different ways that they could score, with 77 being a perfect score, and then 300 obviously being the worst score that you could get. And trying to make a point system, it got very complicated very quickly. So I kind of took a hybrid between both of them. Now, in one case, like I said earlier, in both cases, Holy Priest and Shaman are kind of just down here on their own. You could argue that there's only a real gap here based on one of the metrics. Now, for the most part, this tier list did come out looking very similar to all the other tier lists. So you'll notice here on this tier list, there are no S tier healers. Now, in some of these tier lists, there are S tier healers. However, in order for it to land in S tier, a class to land in S tier under both of these metrics, it would have to land in the S tier on a lot, like most of these guys tier list. But for the most part, the clear winner was Disc Priest. They got the highest score overall under both metrics. They were in the highest tier most consistently. And then depending on which metric you follow, so whichever one of these two score systems you follow, either the point score system or just the average of the tier that they were put in, the top of the tier list looked like this. With the point system, it looked like this, with Disc Priest being slightly having a small gap above these other 4 that were very close together. And in this order, which is kind of funny because Holy Paladin is not toward the top of the A tier on almost any of these 3 tier lists in the middle. However, it being in that S tier on these 2 tier lists did kind of just weight that score. Like I said, the flaw with that point system that I found was that some of these tier lists were weighted different than other ones. So that's why I kind of took a hybrid of both of my different scoring systems. However, if you take a look at the tier list based on where they land on just the average tier that they were put in, it looks something a little bit more like this. Now, Priest lands on both scoring systems probably here. If there was like a C plus tier, it would land here. However, the most notable thing is that there is a small gap between these, all of these up here, and Holy Priest, and then another gap here between Holy Priest and Resto Shaman. And then from this tier list, this kind of average of all these other content creators tier lists, I kind of will go over each spec and why I think they land where they landed. And I'll start from the bottom working up because that would be easiest. So Resto Shaman is clearly below the rest. And I wanted to keep personal experience out of this, but in this section, there will be some personal experience bias just because I'm talking about why I think they land here based on my own play experience. But Resto Shaman didn't really do anything well in Mythic Plus. They struggle with some of the healing patterns. They spend more global cooldowns casting healing spells than I think they've ever done, and thus just doing less damage because you have less global cooldowns to commit to damaging spells than you have in the past. Like in Shadowlands, back when they were meta, you could top everyone up very quickly, and then you had buttons that slammed damage. Now they're kind of the opposite of that. With a tier set that relies on a small hot like Riptide, that's kind of geared more towards your rating where you want to have multiple Riptides out. It just does not perform well in a Mythic Plus environment. And then the buffs to Chain Heal were good for Mythic Plus because like you could take Chain Heal, you could not. Either way, you're still going to land down here clearly below the rest because you're just going to spend too much mana, too much time healing everyone up that you just don't have enough time to get good damage off. And then even that, your healing is just miles below the rest of these guys. And then Holy Priest is kind of just still in that same category that it's been in since, I believe, like Shadowlands. Back when they had Boon of the Ascended, they did good damage while also just still pumping healing. But the problem with Holy Priest is that no matter how powerful of a healing tier set they have, which right now their tier set is pretty solid in a Mythic Plus environment, which is kind of what puts them up here, kind of above Shaman by some margin. The problem is their damage is still just very lacking. So if you're gonna look at some meta tier list, like a meta breakdown tier list, unfortunately damage does have to come in the equation because damage is important. Healer damage is still important in a Mythic Plus environment. And like Resto Shaman, you're going to spend a lot of your global cooldowns just casting heal spells. But the ones that you cast do more healing than Resto Shaman. They're just more efficient healing than Resto Shaman's heal spells. But the damage spells are still just as lackluster compared to some other classes like Preservation Evoker or Disc Priest or even Mistweaver. And on top of that, their healing profile, although being good in a lot of scenarios, the ones where they're weak, it's very weak. Like AoE rot damage scenarios, you can really struggle if you don't have one of your major cooldowns available. And as you know, in a Mythic Plus environment, those scenarios come up pretty frequently. You usually have those, a couple pulls in a row sometimes. So you can really struggle. People can just die to things that other healers can kind of shrug off. And that's just because of your healing profile, your healing spells. Honestly, right now they seem more geared towards a rating environment. And now Resto Druid, they've seen a lot of changes and a lot of ones that I really covet. Like I really like the changes that they've made to Resto Druid, and it makes me want to pick up my Druid again and start playing. And then now with this class tuning, it is a buff to the cat weaving playstyle, which if you've never played the cat weaving playstyle, it is very global cooldown intensive. You always have buttons to press, always have dots to refresh. And that's squeezing your damaging buttons in between all of your healing buttons. So you're just very busy pressing a lot of buttons to kind of get the same or similar return that some of these other classes like Preservation Evoker can get out of just pressing like 3 buttons. So unless these buffs to the cat weaving damage push it higher, like very good in terms of damage, you just won't see a pro pick it, and thus making it meta, unless there's a reason to pick it in terms of optimization, like it just doing more damage than everyone else while still being able to keep the healing flowing. So if it's doing similar healing to all these other specs, doing similar damage than all of these other specs, like not more in either of those categories, but it's just more technically difficult or just brings less utility than something like a priest or a paladin, then you just won't see it picked. And then next up is Evoker. Now, if you had to just take like raw power, like how much power is packed into each healing spec, Preservation is pretty shocking. It's like up here, in my opinion. It's very strong, and there's been a lot of buzz about how powerful Preservation Evoker just feels. Like its tier set's very solid. It can do big damage and it can do big healing very quickly, and its Mythic Plus healing profile just lines up very well because, like I said, you can top people up very quickly. But like I said earlier, like I kind of harped on earlier, is that you just will not see Preservation taken in these high-end keys if there is an augmentation also taken. You would much rather have all the utility of having an augmentation evoker while coupling it with something like a Disc Priest to have like a Mind Soothe and all of that utility as well. However, these nerfs to augmentation, I still think that top low-end pushing groups, you're going to be hard-pressed to find one that does not take an Augmentation Evoker. However, I do think the power level of Preservation Evoker is higher than Holy Paladin. However, in terms of this tier list, Holy Paladin did technically land higher than Preservation Evoker. And now let's talk about Holy Paladin. Now they have just seen a slew of nerfs. Where Mistweaver's seen a slew of buffs, Holy Paladin has seen a slew of nerfs. And I mean, rightfully so. I mean, if you look at these leaderboards from season 2, it's pretty clear why Holy Paladin was brought down so many times to be more even level with some of these other healers. Now, according to most of these YouTubers and most of these streamers, Holy Paladin has been brought down to that level. They have been kicked over, knocked down, and but according to these two, according to MadSkillzz and AutomaticJak, I mean, they are still S tier, still God tier. In their eyes. And part of that kind of comes from the PTR. Just it's really not the best place to test and determine these tier lists. However, a lot of these guys, I mean, that's kind of all you have to go off of. So this is just a very clear indicator that we're going to have to just wait and see once season 2 finally does fully drop where Holy Paladin actually lands on an actual tier list. Are they in this high A tier? Are they still S tier? Or have they been knocked down here with Holy Priests? I think only time will tell, but one big bit of feedback that I've heard from the actual Holy Paladin community is that now their mana is horrible. Like, I've heard that they are stopping to drink between every pack, almost every pack. I've heard it's just really bad, and as a Mistweaver player, I definitely feel that. We've been like that all throughout Shadowlands, and it wasn't until like Mana Tea got brought back and reworked until we, stopped feeling like that. So I feel that. And if you're looking at like a great push scenario where like that is the meta defining classes that people pick, I don't think that you're going to pick a class, no matter how good it is, that has to stop and drink every 5 seconds. But let's just go ahead and move on to these top two, Mistweaver and Disc Priest, the two battle healers. So this is kind of something that a lot of people predicted. In a world where they're trying to make healer damage matter less in a Mythic Plus environment, the two specs that are designed to do the most healer damage were predicted to just, perform better. I mean, it was just basically whoever is the better of the two would be the meta spec. And for the longest time, Mistweaver's kind of been landing down here. But with all of the buffs to Mistweaver, I mean, you look at just how tanky we are now, like with Bounce Back, Calming Presence, all the buffs to Expel Harm, we can just survive a lot more mechanics than we used to while putting out a ton of damage, thus a ton of healing. Same with Disc Priest. They didn't see any survivability buffs, but they've seen good buffs to their rotation that leads to a lot more damage, especially from their tier set and the Smite spam, thus a lot more healing. And both of these specs do have tools that don't just allow yourself to be more defensive, like pressing something like Fortifying Brew, making yourself more defensive. They do have stuff that makes your whole party more defensive, which for the longest time was the main draw to a class like Holy Paladin in a Mythic Plus environment. If you're gonna be pushing plus 30s, plus 31s, you want a healer that can make everyone else survive the damage alongside themselves. So in that environment, in that high-end meta environment, a class like Holy Paladin just would shine. Now, Disc Priest has a slightly better one. They are slightly better at making other classes survive with something like Barrier, with Rapture, just applying these massive shields to whoever you can while Rapture's active, and then having an actual true tank external in Pain Suppression. Now, in low-end keys, like in your plus 20s, you're probably like, well, why is Life Cocoon worse than something like Pain Suppression? And it's just that. It's just that in low-end keys, those mobs are going to be doing less damage to your tank. So a big Absorb Shield will perform better, whereas a tank defensive, a mitigation, they're going to be taking more damage. Thus, the mitigation will go a long way in their effective health bar. However, Mistweavers are so tanky now, like very, very tanky, very hard to kill. I believe it was Maximum's video. Where is it? I believe no, it was Gingi's video. Whoever he has on talking with him. Oh, I guess his name is Thanertv. He was just saying that it is so hard to kill a Mistweaver monk now, and if you couple that with just the amount of solid single target throughput, like the spot healing, all the buffs that Mistweaver received, just makes your tank effectively more tanky. Like if you know your tank's going to be taking heavy damage, you just channel Soothing Mist, spam Vivifies into them, and like I said, with effective health bar, if you're healing back all the damage they're taking more than another class would, you could theoretically get more value than, say, putting a tank defensive on them before all that damage comes in. However, like I said, the main draw to Disc Priest and why it is landing just slightly better than Mistweaver in both categories, both metrics, is that it just does a lot of damage. It does so much damage, and its damage is converted to healing. It does have some weaknesses, but at the high end, they are very well prepped for those weaknesses. You can see when like single target massive chunky damage is going to come in, and you can plan around that by using one of your two charges of pain suppression on like a DPS. And you have the added benefit of not being kind of stuck in melee like a Mistweaver. And by stuck in melee, I mean Holy Paladin's also a melee healer, especially Mythic Plus. The only difference is Holy Paladin has longer range than Mistweaver. Mistweaver has good range on AoE packs. You can spinning crank kick and kind of back out of melee. However, in like a boss scenario, if they're spawning swirlies underneath themselves, you would historically lose a ton of healing by not being able to stick to that boss. However, with all the buffs, like I said, to their spot healing, that hole is basically fixed. You can just step back, cast a massive Vivify that's going to do a massive cleave, and do a lot of throughput even in those scenarios. So what did you guys think of this video? Did you like kind of taking a look at other YouTubers' tier list, or would you have preferred that I just made my own one alongside these guys? Make sure and let me know down in the comments what you guys think. And I want to say a quick apology for how sick I am. I'm sure you guys can probably hear it. I'm absolutely dying right now, but I didn't want to let that stop me, because I personally think this is a good idea, just taking a look at these other guys' tier lists, and instead of making one for myself, just talking about theirs. What do I think of theirs? And I didn't want to wait too late to make this video. So thank you so much for watching this video. And thank you especially to the Patreons of this channel. You guys are what pushes this channel further toward me being a full-time YouTuber. And I really, really, from the bottom of my heart, appreciate that. You have no idea how far it goes for a small YouTuber like myself. But guys, if you are not subscribed, make sure and hit that button on your way out. And while you're down there clicking that button, leaving a comment what you guys thought, make sure and hit the like button, because that also helps me, helps this video get seen by more people by tricking that pesky YouTube algorithm. But guys, that's gonna do it for this video. Just a quick summary. If you skip to this part in the video, you cannot go wrong picking any of these 5 healers. They're all really solid. But what's predicted to do the best is Disc Priest, followed closely behind by Mistweaver, followed even closer behind by the rest of these guys. But I'm not going to keep you here any longer. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, take care.